connecting to his audio. There we go.
Okay. Andy, did you hear what Peter said?
No.
I said I've started using Miro, and if I don't like it, I'll blame Kaufman.
Oh, okay. Well, you can blame the folks at the Value Web because there's Mural and Miro. Did you say Miro or Mural?
M-I-R-O, Miro.
Yeah.
There's
Because-
also Mural, and they do the same thing. They're like online collaboration whiteboards, and I'm so confused. Like that would be like the car companies being like BMW and WMB or something. Like it was like I'm like what? But
Or BWM.
Yeah,
How's that?
BWM. How about
Yeah,
that?
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's so interesting that such a new space and everyone is hustling to try to make a bunch of opportunity out of this.
Sure.
So.
So not to be confused, the likelihood is, I guess we are using Miro for convenings coming up, so that if people get used to it, that would be a good thing. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, part of the ongoing conversation is how to use Miro and what level of activity and what kind of activity people have hands on. I think the latest is that we want to not have a digital tool that is the focus. We want it to serve the whole. And if we think that there's a way, I think there's a way we can do that. It may involve having spaces where people can work and contribute, and other spaces that are maybe view only, where a team of us are working on that or pulling something together. So I'd say what exact role it plays is to be determined, but yes, it'll be there. So
Yeah, I'll have to check back with you. So I know Celia, not to hijack your meeting, but we started, Celia mentioned it to me, and then I looked at it and I kind of liked it. And so I subscribed, and they have a 30% discount for not-for-profits. So, you know, it's not particularly expensive because I'm just involving, there are 3 people on the subscription. It's the 2 people I've been collaborating with in our Day After initiative. So we thought my thinking is to use that a way as sort of mapping out the various conversations we're pulling together, because we're now getting to having a library of Day After conversations. So we're going to be adding our National Urban League conversations soon. And we've got some others scheduled so we have Charlotte, National Urban League, Source America, and we're booking one for Nebraska, rural Nebraska, and long-term healthcare in Massachusetts. So we should have a pretty good start on the library. So then I want a place to sort of visualize what we're learning. So.
Excellent, thank you. So welcome everybody to the Goal 3 call before the summit. We're fairly close, and I'm gonna turn it over to Scott and Mike, who've kind of facilitated a lot of these. Scott, I renamed you so that you weren't Mike Fleisch number 2. Mike seems to have changed his background, so he's no longer on the yacht. Do you want to do a quick check-in before we roll into this? And I also gave you the ability to share screen, so just gonna let you roll with it.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm gonna drop a link in the chat to the kind of current draft of the mission, vision, value statements. Did folks, I know I got some notes there from Beth and Andy, and I know Brett and Eric had chimed in on Slack. Did other folks have a chance to take a look at this?
Did.
I mean, more than anything, I think the most valuable use of our time here is to kind of identify any of the points of ambiguity or anything that is kind of emerging as a challenge or like a strong opportunity in this language, and discussing what direction we want to take those in before we lead to a next draft. As a kind of a brief tee up, since I was having a scheduling snafu and wasn't able to make last month's call, in the vision statement in particular, and Beth, I think you left a really great note here. This concept of model entrepreneurial communities seemed like it was on the right track, but it wasn't quite enough, maybe not specific enough, or not enough heart. So I threw out a bunch of options, a non-exhaustive list of options for how to kind of modify that or add to it to let it do a little bit more of what we want. What I really like about the kind of framing of model entrepreneurial communities speaks exactly to Beth's question, is that it has kind of a nice freeing amount of ambiguity. To take Valto's kind of guidance from the sandbox document, that a vision should be something that is large, possibly unattainable, something that you're kind of North Star pushing to over an extended period of time. I think this idea of model entrepreneurial communities speaks both to kind of a group goal, which would be the establishment of a model community of entrepreneurs, or model communities which are entrepreneurial, without being overly prescriptive about exactly what that means. It gives us a chance to kind of learn more, grow into it. It gives the opportunity for kind of multiple different ideas of what that model would look like. And then I like the double meaning as well, kind of the verb of it, that the vision of this field would be to model entrepreneurial communities as an opportunity to kind of test against one another or with one another, and further develop what that kind of ideal end state would be. Beyond that, I took a shot at some mission and value statements. Some of the specifics there can probably stand to be tweaked from folks that are a little bit deeper in this work than I am, but I did my best to kind of represent what I was seeing and hearing in these conversations in this text. And I would love some feedback.
Can I give one or two quick notes or additions or context for what Scott said, which is that, you know, as you heard Scott say when we discussed this after our last call, I tried to reflect back, and I know he watched the video of that too, but I tried to reflect back what I was hearing around the tone and the purpose that people felt, I think rightly so, was missing. And so I think, you know, the many versions here of saying toward what, like, what is this directed toward? What is it in service of? Why are we doing this? You know, what is the human or communal or, you know, purpose-driven point behind something? So if something is stating something in maybe a way that feels a little clever without connecting with that purpose or the why, then we would say that we haven't reflected the intent of this group, and I think really also not reflecting the point of what a vision statement is supposed to be doing. So having heard that and reflected on it, I'll say that I still think there is something really valuable in those three words together, that I really appreciated that Scott pulled those three words together. I think they do a really great job personally of distilling what is at the heart of the work itself, without, again, using the words that I think very often can turn people off or that can be confusing. I think there's lots of kinds of ambiguity, and I heard Scott use that word. I think there's the confusing kind. To me, this is closer to something where if someone says, do you mean this or this? It's easy to say, yes, it's both. It's both and it's also either or any. It's the one that you find your way into this. And to me, that actually, I think with a statement or two to support that and to kind of give some of that context, which again, I've seen organizations doing more and more, where it's yes, here's your few words, but ideally that's an invitation to a conversation, and supplying a little bit of that context in a couple more sentences that the same way that the the value statements have a top line value, but then some context for them and a couple sentences supporting. To me, this could use that. Whether it's a version that's here or something else, I think that's a good idea. Actually, is you're really ultra short, ultra memorable, vision statement or goal, and then something else to support it, and really again, those few words on the top of your head, but also ideally it opens up a conversation. So I wanted to give that context that Scott and I had those conversations. I tried to reflect back what we had talked about, and just to say that with a little time and digging into this, that's where I certainly now sit in relationship to it. Also, the final thing I'll say is just remembering, what is the point of this part of this exercise? What are we inviting people to as part of ESHIP, and how do we want the community to relate to this? What kind of input, feedback, dialogue do we want to try and incite around this, all of these pieces of language?
I really appreciate the values point. It calls out a lot of things that we talk about as being top of mind and kind of tenets of the ways that we approach things. The one piece I'd like to see in there, and I think taking a page from what Forward Cities does in talking about beyond DEI, so diversity, equity, inclusion is what a lot of people talk about. And then now it's DIB, which leaves out the equity, which is a shame, but being diversity, inclusion, and belonging. But I like the way Forward Cities talks about ABIDE, which is access, belonging, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And that access thing is I think what we talk about around, America's New Business Plan, the Right to Start movement, all of those things are talking about the fact that this should be accessible and inclusive to all. So I think the thing that we lack, and the thing that ecosystem builders strive for, is that there is accessibility as well as equity in the work that we do, so that everybody is invited to, and they can take part in their own custom and bespoke ways.
Yeah, that's a valuable note. Thank you. I think we can definitely work that in.
So on the equity issue, this is something that I struggle with a lot. And Scott, you know that this has been a conversation you and I've had independently. So when everybody's in the last sentence, when everybody's including equitable terms and anti-racist policies are enacted. So there are a couple issues. First of all, in the work we've been doing and what we've been looking at, and I realize the moment and the tension is focused on race, but gender, disability, age, returning citizens, immigration, these all are other factors in the intersection of these that have significant and substantial barriers. And so, whereas this isn't like Black Lives Matter and then, oh no, but all lives matter. I'm not suggesting I'm not making an equivalent here, but it is we can point to systemic racist, gendered, ethnicity, whatever policies and practices that create inequitable situations. And I don't know how to easily say that, but I think it's wrong not to acknowledge that.
I think that's a great point as well.
Can I ask a question for you, Scott?
Sure.
Just within the logistics of this document, under vision, you have all those different, model entrepreneurial communities, ... The intention there is those are just like 12 versions that you kind of is playing around with the words sort of came up with. But the idea was eventually we would land on one of those as sort of the anchor phrase for everything else. Is that kind of the idea there?
That was, yeah, more or less what I was going for. And it wouldn't necessarily be one of these, but kind of allowing these to inform whatever that kind of tight, small sentence.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Would be.
Yeah, so, yeah, okay. All right, that makes sense. And then the next segment where you sort of tried a different phrase would just be another way to say it, but it sounds like you and Mike are pretty excited about model entrepreneurial communities as sort of the core of that phrase because of the various things we've already discussed.
Yeah, the other ones are other ways in, just to
Okay.
see if there was a lot of enthusiasm for any of these, or if we had great ideas to kind of grow out of these starting points.
Okay, great.
And also I would say exactly, Scott, and also to show, if it's not exactly one of those, like hopefully to incite, like here's a few ways of grouping together the center of what this work seems to be or what the ambition is. And if it's not one of these, maybe there's something else in this vein. But in some ways, I'd say trying to show the guardrails that have currently been explored, and in some ways to also poke and say, if none of these feel right, then it's probably not a statement exactly like this, and we need to really jump sideways, which may be the right thing to do. But I feel like if it's something like this, then something here is probably about right.
Yeah. So let me just say general feedback. I really like all of this, and thank you for taking the time to synthesize what has been, hundreds of pages of input and stuff. So just really want to appreciate that, first of all. And then playing around with the language and sort of with those phrases, I think is interesting. It's an interesting exercise, and gets us towards something succinct and clear, which I like. I really like the mission values thing piece because it's very concrete. As you mentioned, Mike, the sort of playfulness and cleverness in the phrases at the top is good, but it also is vague, and so allows for a lot of misinterpretation. But it depends on the usage, right? So let me just say overall, 2 use cases that I see for this. One we've discussed, one I don't know if we've discussed, where where this is very helpful. So just like maybe help us reflect on it. And what I often use this, I stole this from someone else, but the goal on these things isn't wordsmithing it to death. It's 80% correct. Like, do we all agree it's like 80% correct? Great, that's good enough, because we'll never get to 100, because there's lots of words you can talk about. So within that 80% correct, does it generally get what we're talking about? Are we missing anything? And my sense right now, it's probably 80% correct or pretty close to it. And my use case though is we're going to take this, and I think we're going to share it, given this or some, the next iteration of it in some way with the larger community of practitioners at the ESHIP Summit and seek their input, feedback, thoughts, this being the synthesis of 3 years of ESHIP Summit. So that's a good usage. The one that I get even more excited about is ESHIP goal number 4.6 is around building, I think it says standards, body, or governance, but I've referred this, I internally in my world refer to this as the center of excellence for ecosystem building. And as I've mentioned before, the Kauffman Foundation is interested in figuring out how to specifically support that, the formation of a center of practice or excellence or whatever you want to call it for ecosystem building. All the details TBD. But this document could be handed to a task force of people that was designing this center of excellence for this field and say, this is the synthesis of hundreds, if not thousands of people doing the work. And generally speaking, this is 80% correct. So what is the point of the center of excellence? It's to be an anchor of a field that gets at these things in this document. And I could see this document, particularly the missions and value part, really helping that group center around, okay, what's the point of this? What is the heart of this field that this center of excellence is supposed to be an advocate for? So those 2 use cases, even where it's at now, I think this is solid. So thank you. Those are my thoughts.
I see a conversation going in the comments. You know, generally, thanks for that clarity, Scott, on, you know, how much of this we want to use in the vision section. I think ultimately, you know, for example, Eric brings up the towards equity and is it address systemic inequities. I like in a vision, the ability to say what it looks like at the end. So if all those things are done, like if we've addressed systemic inequities, what does it look like? And so it kind of brings me to almost a narrowing of the options here. First off, I love the model entrepreneurial communities or two model entrepreneurial communities. Makes it a little less affirmative. And so I like sticking with that, but there's probably one or two above in that grouping that in the end could encompass all of that. And while a vision statement naturally is going to be brief and therefore open the door to some other interpretations of what it can mean or misconceptions, you know, from what I've seen in standard practice, you still want to be big and bold in that statement. You want to be brief in that statement. And you also want it to be kind of an open, you know, to open the barn doors for people to define that in some ways that maybe we don't even see in the current day. And so, like I see the of, by, and for all. And for me, that just like, that's this, you know, there's the bullseye, then there's the center of the bullseye. And that feels like the center of the bullseye in a lot of ways. And maybe there's other elements in there that complement that or lead up to that, but that almost feels like it should be the last words in a vision statement. There's very little confusion about who's going to create it and who it's going to serve when you read that. And it's hard for me because I have the Ford Cities hat on so much. So like we do come at it from equity first. And I know this is, you know, not that this approach is disclusive of that, but it's, you know, it's obviously maybe a little more broad than Hassan and Eric and I have to look at it just with our Ford Cities hats on.
On the of, by, and for all note, that is the name of a arts like organizing effort, but it's also straight from the Declaration of Independence. So I don't know if that's off the table or not.
I don't think it's off the table.
Do you say it's off the table because it's been used recently, or?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. When I read that, I'm a former history teacher, so I was going right to the Declaration. It felt like that's what we were really speaking to, and maybe in a more accurate sense of what should have been meant when that document was written than what it ended up meaning for the last 240 some years.
What I think about too is just in the last couple of months, particularly after the George Floyd murder, there's a lot of discussion about, you know, a more perfect union, that was the promise that's never been achieved. Our economies don't serve everyone. So even that reference towards the Declaration is actually kind of it's an American-centric way to look at it, but it is, you don't have to also make it overt. It's like you either know the reference or you don't, but regardless, it makes sense. I like it because it speaks to a number of different things that are individually addressed in ones above, but you manage to smash it into less words. My one gut suggestion would be putting a word before entrepreneurial communities. So what kind of entrepreneurial communities? Back to what end? Because, you know, but I think if you had full equity, if everyone had equity, then the communities would thrive and the individuals in those communities would thrive because you have an economy that allows everyone to participate. So again, I don't want to wordsmith here, but my gut is thinking like model thriving entrepreneur communities of, by, and for all, which gets the to what end in there indirectly. What do you think about that? That's not sacred. That was just a gut.
Yeah, I think it's totally worth playing around with.
Well,
Beth,
not the word, I'm sorry, please go.
No, go ahead, Peter.
Not to get too wordsmithy then on that, but if you're going to do if you're going to, and if you're going to do that, then well, there were two thoughts going on in my mind. First of all, I think we have to use equity together with equality. Those two have different meanings. And so as to focus on equity, that's, in my mind, is sort of like it's the same, it's allowing for a same starting point, but there still needs to be equality in terms of access to resources and other sorts of things. So equal access, equal opportunity, and the like. And so I think we can't, it isn't sufficient to simply focus on equity, just like it hasn't been sufficient in the past to focus on equality, which has been, the sort of the approach that had been taken, which is everybody has equal opportunity, but they really don't, because it's not an equitable system. And then the other thing is, there's a little bit of difference in my mind, and I realize the illusion, going back to the Declaration of Independence, but I'm wondering if it's of, by, and for every, or each, as well as for all. Because part of the idea of entrepreneurship is built on the notion of sort of an individual idea and creativity moving forward, and that's not an all situation, that's an each situation. And I'm just playing with it, but it's and it may not fit there. It may be something that we get into later on, beyond the vision and into the other details. But it is something that is sort of part of the ethos of entrepreneurship, is that it's also sort of celebrating the individual's activity and action. Just a couple thoughts.
But if it's really benefiting all, if we're able to achieve thriving communities, right?
Yes, but the act of entrepreneurship can be individual, and we're also supporting that as well.
Yeah, in my mind, that supporting entrepreneurs leads to the thriving communities that benefits all.
That's hoped for, but not necessarily a direct consequence. It's a hoped for consequence.
I think the interesting part, and I was going to ask you, Beth, what you thought, because you were the one that made a comment on that line. But to follow in what Peter's saying, I wonder what it would be if we wrote equity and equality specifically in there, so that there's no misconstruing. Like, there's a reason that we put both words in, right? Equity and equality. But the thing that I actually like about this more, when Scott wrote people first as opposed to entrepreneurs first, I mean, we talk about putting entrepreneurs first, but as we talk about this practice of ecosystem building versus the profession of ecosystem building, that's saying that you, in whichever role that you're taking in the community, whether you're an economic developer or a policymaker or whatever, you're actually thinking about the people first aspect, and it's not solely about just putting the entrepreneurs first, but including everyone else in the ecosystem in their unique gifts that they bring, and helping the ecosystem thrive. Right? If we work solely in the service of entrepreneurs, does that mean that there's a tier thing where other people that don't consider themselves entrepreneurs, or where does small business lie, and all those other questions keep bubbling up? So I like the people first as opposed to entrepreneurs first.
I'm a little bit of a latecomer to this particular conversation, so maybe my fresh observation might be worth something, is that even though we're talking about values and mission, I'm a little fuzzy on reading this about what the overall outcome might be from the ecosystem building from reading this. And when you talked about the entrepreneur versus the group, frankly, they're both important, just as an observation, because, but the fact that we're talking about ecosystems is talking about something much larger than any individual entrepreneur, and that we're trying to make the entire ecosystem successful, we or the builder. And so it's just an observation coming in 5 minutes ago to seeing this document for the first time. I didn't realize that was such a showstopper.
There's some element. Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
There's some element that you're calling out there, CJ, and Peter, you said it as well. And I don't know where it gets captured in this, but it's the idea, if the individuals thrive, then the systems thrive. But in order for the system to thrive, wait, let me do that again. The individuals thrive, the system thrives, but for the individuals to thrive, the system has to thrive. And it's like there's that Mike will have a word for this, but the way that those are interdependent.
It's interdependence.
Okay, interdependence of that, and it's
all for one and one
is.
for all. All for one and one for all. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, something like that. Peter, that kind of captures what you're saying, but it also what is but it's that's such a key, I don't know, it's a value or it's like a function of a complex system.
I love that declaration of interdependence that Scott just wrote.
Be careful about that. There was actually a conference that was run for several years called Interdependence Day. So it may actually be trademarked. So just be careful about that.
Declaration of interdependence?
It may be, but they actually did have a declaration of interdependence. And this was,
that one's taken.
Maybe
I'm just letting you know, just double check it. That's all.
Yeah, you're right. I found it.
But there,
oh boy, I found it.
It may make sense, and feel free to weigh in. Maybe interdependence is another value that hits on that idea. But there's also this, we wrote a declaration of interdependence for ecosystem building. It's in the playbook when we started this whole ESHIP Summit series. But there's another element of interdependence as well. That's like, if my community thrives and your community thrives, or if my community thrives, it's not like your community suffers. So like we all have to work together. Like if Tiffany does some things that grow entrepreneurs and it's very successful, then Beth's community isn't worse off. It's actually better off. But it's taking away the competition that is inherent right now, and a lot of particularly economic development, but other aspects of communities.
In one way, what you're saying is that it's a recognition of the the romance of the success of the individual entrepreneur, but these days it's also a recognition that very few individual entrepreneurs make it without a larger, a broader ecosystem to support them, and a real recognition of that. But celebrating the individual, but realizing that you cannot do it without the ecosystem of whether it's investors, customers, mentors, support organizations.
Yeah, and that's why I had kind of a funny smile on my face when I said interdependence, because I know that there's both history and present in relationship to that word, both certainly in that declaration of interdependence that's been in the playbook, but also obviously Philip has made it a focus of his these days. And it's, he's put out a couple thought pieces on that. So that's why I said that when I said it, that's why I had that kind of goofy smile on my face. Is it's kind of funny that we should have that word here in a thoughtful way, because it's been historically significant, and also right now it's a word that's being highlighted. Certainly, to your point, CJ, I mean, another document or piece of work that's come out of Kaufman is the point about, the 3 and the 997. I think different ways of talking about and articulating and even marketing that relationship of the people who are starting business with everybody else, and what their potential role is in that. What do we mean by community? What is the role of community? To me, that's part of why I was really drawn to this framing of model entrepreneurial communities, because I think it both talks about communities of entrepreneurs, which itself I know has been a fraught term, and there's a lot of hangups with that word for people. I like the way that this talks about a community as something that can be entrepreneurial, both as composed of entrepreneurs, but also in a way of being, in a way of relating to that work, and even in a mindset. So there's a lot of work that I thought that statement did that I thought really helped frame all of those things in relationship to each other. And I keep going back to, I think any one of these would be really helped by a few sentences that give context for whatever it is.
I'm curious, Tiffany, if you had any thoughts on any of this stuff.
I have thoughts, but sometimes I feel like I'm on a different wavelength than everybody else when it comes to this stuff. It just feels so unclear, and I understand the need for it to be applicable for all of the different perspectives, experiences, and work that we do. But going back to that idea of a vision being something aspirational and the North Star that we're all working towards, it's really hard to do that when we don't know what any of these things mean. And so I do like, I think it was Peter, or maybe it was Cecilia, but the idea of adding for each and all, of, by, and for each and all, that gives it a little bit of clarity, I guess, because for each, we can think of that for ourselves as each, or the individuals that we work with, and we know what that means better than what we know for all means. But I just feel like some more clear guardrails would be helpful as it pertains to the vision.
Cool. And I think an important thing to keep in mind as we're going through all of this is that the vision will often be in the context of either this kind of description that Mike is doing a good job of reminding us might need to exist, and in relationship to the mission and values, which can help kind of ground it in understandable, kind of actionable terms.
So
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna ask Michael. Michael joined us recently, and he's been on several of the goal calls, and he's been doing ecosystem building both in the United States and Australia. So as somebody, and particularly because the goal 2 call on Monday, we talked about collaborative cultures, we talked about what brings people into the ecosystem work, and what kind of hooked you in to the work that we're doing. And we made a list of those. So Scott, I'll share that, the agenda document with you with the notes, but I'm curious to hear from somebody, fresh set of eyes, hasn't been involved in the conversations leading up to this, because you will be like the people that we're going to present this to at the ESHIP Summit. What are your initial thoughts on this?
Well, I love language, Anna, so it's wonderful to hear you wrestling through words and thinking about what meaning they carry, what meaning might be absent, What, how could they possibly be misunderstood? I'm fascinated by the attempts to pack so much meaning into so few words, and the amount of energy you're putting into wrestling through that, because I agree that it is extremely important to get right. One of the things I think I'm hearing is that we know we can't assume agreement across some of the fundamental ideologies which underlie entrepreneurship. Historically and currently, there is a lot of individualism, rugged or otherwise, that exists, and entrepreneurs don't instinctively, not all of them, see their work as part of a community or an ecosystem. And so that this, I'm called back to some of my work previously with developing spiritual communities and drawing on Dallas Willard's work. He was a professor at USC and developed a construct of what a human is, and he identified the person itself. Before we're an entrepreneur, we're a person that is something. We are a mind and a body and a heart and a will, and it all makes up a soul. And he puts into that, we are a social creature. You cannot understand who we are outside of being connected to the ecosystem around us. That's part of our identity. But, a significant percentage of our population, general and of entrepreneurs, do not default to that mode of thinking. And so calling that out as this, I feel you guys have been working through that partly over the last half hour. What does that mean to include that in just a handful of words so that a person who defaults to rugged individualism in everything they do, and as soon as they get what they need out of an ecosystem, if they've dipped into the community to find some resources, they're back to in an isolated mode of entrepreneurship. How can we shake them up a little bit out of that with just a few words? I don't know. I suppose, though, that in the context of ecosystem builders, it's very unlikely that people will misunderstand that, because we're all here with that as a pretext. And see, I'm identifying the audience of the entrepreneurs, and that's not who we're talking to. And so I'm wondering if it becomes something that is a shared value, and we don't have to pack that much meaning into the each and all phrasing. So that's just what I've been thinking in the last 10 minutes.
I just like to shout out, Mike. I don't think we've met. I was anticipating you're going to be like, "Oh, I'm new. I don't really have any thoughts." Then you just gave a sermon on it, that has like a fire starter talk basically on this. So just snaps for that. I was like, "Whoa! Oh my God! So many thoughts." So
It's nice to meet you, Andy.
Props for jumping in. That was awesome. I learned like 10 things from all of you.
Celia, this, and I'm mentioning your name because you and I have had a lot of conversations on this. This reminds me of the conversation we've been having with a couple of the other groups, which is this a conference for getting, is ESHIP about getting people on board in building entrepreneurial ecosystems, or is it for advancing the practice of entrepreneurial ecosystem builders? And Andy, this has come up a couple of times in some of these calls, and particularly where it came up was in how the conference is being split up. So the first two, whether who's the audience for each of the 3 days, or is it broken into to two segments, the first 2 days and then the third, because and there was this sort of back and forth about, well, this should be about bringing more people into the tent of ecosystem building, and then anything else about the profession or action of creating a profession of ecosystem builders and supporting that is sort of like inside baseball. And so this is, to me, this is sort of taking on the same question here. And I view this as something for ecosystem builders who are already into the idea that this is their mission, this is their purpose. And so it may not have value for the broader audience, in other words, at this point.
I mean, yeah, I would say for this document, I mean, I think what we're talking about is this document is essentially the founding papers for a professional practice or professional field of ecosystem building, to Michael's point. This is speaking to ecosystem builders or entrepreneurs who want to build their ecosystem, anyone who wants to build it. But this is sort of the founding document or the founding seed document of it that has synthesized 3 years of work and input from lots of people. To answer your question about the ESHIP Summit, which is, I won't go too deep because it's not the point of the call right now, that we're going to use this at the summit. When the summit started, the answer is yes, and, because it has to do a little bit of both. It has to help people get into ecosystem building. But when we started, couldn't even explain what it was that well. And so it's in an evolutionary path to do both, but this year, because it's virtual, the realization by the program team was this can be a onboarding for anyone into ecosystem building. So to your point, to your question, I think the 15th and 16th are that, hey, you don't know about ecosystem building or you want to get a wide view of why it's important right now. 15th and 16th. That 29th day is like, let's continue to do the work that's building on lots of the work that all of you have been doing, which is building the field. It's an event that Kauffman hosts to host that conversation, but that building the field is so much wider than just the Kauffman Foundation. The goals being sort of the anchor, and in a perfect world, those would be truly felt and owned by many people and organizations, including the Kauffman Foundation. I think we're headed that way. But I think this document is specifically speaking to building the profession or professional practice, whatever the right word is there, for ecosystem building or entrepreneurial ecosystem building, is to be super clear.
Zahn, do you have something you'd like to add? Hassan?
Hey, sorry about that. No, I was just thinking, I mean, I've just been looking at the first paragraph on mission and just thinking, listening to what everybody was saying and just trying to, I mean, the thing that keeps popping into my head, and not so much for a vision or a mission, but just in terms of ultimately what we're trying to achieve. And I think we're trying to fit so many different concepts in words and be all encompassing. But like and I wrote something in the comments that just like keeps circling around in my head. And I don't know where this would fit or how it fits into anything, but just in terms of how I'm thinking about this, like ultimately what we're doing is working to build, and I wrote this in, build inclusive and connected entrepreneurial communities where collaboration and the interdependence of the individual parts and the whole are valued over competition. And I'm just trying to think about how that concept makes its way or works into what we're talking about, because I mean, that's kind of where my head is at.
Yeah, that's super helpful, because I think we point to the competition aspect, right? Where there's not enough pie for everybody, and the abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. And I like you calling that out because it adds value to thriving, robust ecosystems for all, where that's the sticking point that we come up to on what's good ecosystem building, what's bad ecosystem building, what's ecosystem building versus ecosystem building. I mean, those topics come out often when we're talking about this work, right? So is there the point where we put a stake in the ground and say, you know, we're not saying competition is a bad thing, but we're choosing this over that? Is this a stake in the ground that we're willing to commit to? Eric?
And I know with goal, I mean, with goal one, with inclusive field, I think even the word inclusion, I think if that needs to somehow get incorporated, because I mean so inclusion means so many different things. I mean, it's not just about different people, it's about sectors, it's about geography, it's about education, it's about so many things. And I think it's not specific to one conversation that we're having, because I think it applies just looking forward and at the field in general, I think the concept of inclusion and everything that inclusion means will still apply, you know, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because there will always be, again, whether it's education, um, you know, race, national origin, uh, sector, anything at all. I mean, there will always, that concept of being inclusive will always exist. So I just think in some way that has to be part of what we're talking about.
You know, I want to also be mindful of time, and I know I'm so curious to hear what Brett and Eric have to share, or anybody else who'd like to contribute. But what do you see as next steps for this to land on something that, knowing that we don't have a scheduled call, there's no reason why we could not schedule another call, but knowing that we're going to start being really heads down in Summit, is there a desire or a request to circle back one more time before the 29th? Because Andy, are we going to present this before the 29th or share whatever draft iteration it's at? Or is this really specific for the 29th? And that being the case, trying to figure out the schedules.
I mean, my sense of it, and Mike, feel free to jump in as the facilitating designer of the agenda sessions, is the 29th is where there's actually opportunity to really wrestle with this with small groups of people and feedback and input, whatever we're going to do with people who care about the field of ecosystem building. That said, on the 15th and 16th, there should be an opportunity to get hundreds of people to look at it and give feedback if we want. If it's not quite there yet, I think that's fine. There's other ways to also get that kind of feedback, but there will be lots of people that we could have respond or something to it. But definitely the 29th of September, that event that's focused really on building the professional practice field of it is where we would probably wrestle with it. And Mike and his team at Valuewell will be designing that interaction with it. So Scott as well, sorry.
And for clarity, is the intention to have the group walk into the 29th and, you know, participate in a wordsmith process, or are we giving them something that we feel is ready to be vetted and letting them, you know, shape it? I guess there's not a huge difference between what I just said, but, you know, it really would define how much more work there is to do on our end heading into the 29th.
I was going to address that a little, partially address that, which is that big groups are generally really great at certain types of feedback, and also in some ways not great at other kinds of feedback. And so I would say for me, the values stuff, the mission stuff, those are really good to get lots of people's input on, because it's really different from a vision statement where you're trying to put a very short, you know, almost distilled, very wordsmithed, you know, piece together. And so input on the broader values, mission, and some of that more expansive stuff, and see even some language, you know, that's more those context pieces. That's the kind of thing that typically large groups, the type of way they can interact with that and the feedback they can give can be really valuable. Try and get a large group, other than saying, you know, the shot in the dark where someone comes up with a really beautiful statement that everyone eventually says, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So in some ways it's asking people to give input more in some ways from scratch, but having a lot of people give input on like 3 or 4 or 8 words typically is a harder thing. And the tendency is that we end up jamming in, like, we also need this word, we also need this word, and it ends up subverting the point of it. So I think to me, there's pieces of this that it would be great to get, hundreds of people's input on, and other pieces that we probably want to hold a little closer, would be my take.
I think values especially. If people have like hold very strong values and they don't see them represented, that would be really great to know.
Okay, I like Scott's suggestion about him taking another pass at a draft. Thank you for saying that you would do that. And then we'll share it in the Slack channel for sure. It seems like if we hold, there's a couple of reasons to meet between the 16th and the 29th, and we're talking about the need to introduce people to goals and all other things. So let's see, let's get Scott to take a crack at it, share it in the Slack channel, and then I can put out a doodle or something for sometime if it seems that we'd like to chime in a little bit more, or we're comfortable with this is the first pancake, and we can share parts of it. There's no obligation to share this whole thing with the crowd on this 15th and 16th. We can actually share a vision or or talk about missions and values. Like, there's no reason it has to be presented all in one chunk, right? We can share part of it and let that go, and then say we're working on some other things and we'd like to do this on the 29th just as an invitation. So
Thanks.
whatever that process is.
Thanks. And then the other thing I was just going to add to that is that typically the values is the starting point, and getting feedback on that sometimes can shape then where you want some of the other things to go. So they're considered most foundational, and they suit themselves well to that type of feedback and interaction. The other thing I just put in the chat is that thing we've heard here and previously, we can have some context for those statements and say, here's the way we plan on using these, or here's where this has come from, but as much as possible, not just saying, here's the thing we came up with, everybody. The more we can give context for that, talk about how we've heard that they might be used and what their intention is, the more that we can put that wrapper on those, the better as well.
Okay. I think, Andy, any parting thoughts?
Y'all are awesome. This is not easy, but doing it together is the only way to get it to work. So thank you.
Yeah, trusting the process. Okay, I will upload this video. We'll wait for Scott, and we'll meet you back on Slack and go from there. Thank you all.
Can I share one more thing, Celia, which is that in some other work I've done, there's this, I think it's Jim Collins who writes a lot about, vision and values and a lot of this, but the teams that he talks about who create these things, they call them Mars teams. I have mixed feelings about it, but I think it's telling that it's the idea that you're the sort of expedition who goes and tries things out and digs way in, and then comes back and having gone through that exercise, sort of shares back with everybody. And so really, without us naming this earlier or thinking of it that way, that's what these calls and this group has come to represent in some ways. So yeah, like everyone's saying, I think grateful for that, because it's not easy.
Are we allowed to get lost along the way during that journey to Mars?
We'll try not to leave anyone behind.
Don't watch that Matt Damon movie, whatever you do.
So, I mean, it seems to me that the only mission to Mars anybody's been talking about is a one-way mission. So I'm not sure that that's exactly right either.
So they don't have pandemics on Mars, though, so maybe sign up.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Yet. We haven't
Great.
got there yet.
And on that note, thank you all so much for your time and
Yes,
energy. Have a good day.
Take care.
Bye.